Okay, in today's video, guys, we're going to be talking about the 5 key phases when it comes to ACL rehab, what you should be aiming to achieve in those phases so you can be really successful in your ACL rehab journey. So the reason there's 5 key phases is because you need to have distinct goals broken down by the phase in which you're in across the course of your rehab. We know this is a long-term process with typically a 9-month timeline associated with ACL rehab. Obviously, that can be shorter, that can be longer. But one of the key things that we have to associate with ACL rehab is criteria-based rehab, not just time-based rehab. In other words, simply because 9 months has passed is not good enough to make sure that you're not going to go back and re-injure yourself, particularly given we know the statistics around re-injury can be as high as 40% re-injury rates in those who don't follow criteria-based return to sport assessment. So the reason we need to have 5 key phases because goal-based criteria means you've always got the next thing to work towards. It keeps you motivated, keeps you focused, and it just means you aren't drifting, not really being sure what the next goal is. Because in a difficult long-term process, you need to have constant short-term goals to work towards to make sure that you're super motivated consistently. And don't get me wrong, there's going to be periods where it's going to be very, very hard, particularly in that kind of middle phase between 3 to 6 to 9 months. That can be very, very difficult. But with the right goals, it makes it much, much easier. So if we start at the beginning, phase one, this is what we would call a return to function or return to mobility. And really, the aim here is to make sure that you've got your knee range of motion and quad activation back to 100%. This isn't something that you can skip, and it does cause a lot of long-term problems if you don't get this right first time round. So don't rush through it. Make sure you do it properly. We're usually looking at around the sort of 6 to 12 week mark here, where we're trying to get full range of motion back. Depending on the type of graft you've had, it might be that flexion will come later. Typically, extension will come first, and that's for a number of reasons. Things like swelling and effusion. If you've had a hamstring graft, then that can sometimes limit flexion for a slightly longer period of time. Extension in the first port of call is really the most important thing. Flexion secondary really in the first couple of weeks. So just making sure we're really, really targeting that full range of motion. There's a few things that can assist this. Number one, using something like a complex or electrical stimulation can passively activate the muscles that typically are going to be reduced and not going to be getting as much neuromuscular drive during injury because the central nervous system is going to try and protect you. Now, obviously, that's beneficial in some sense, but when it comes to rehab, obviously, it can actually hinder the process and hinder the speed at which you can move through that rehab. So something like a complex can be really, really useful because you're going to get more quad activation that way. And the more quad activation we have, the higher the chance we're going to achieve full extension because that's the primary role of the quadricep is knee extension. And a secondary thing we can do there is actually fatigue the hamstring a little bit so that it's not resisting that extension. So things like bridges prior to doing our quad set activations and straight leg raises and things like that will help to assist more extension in the knee. So that's the first one. Ideally, you want to get to at least 0 degrees of extension. In other words, full lockout, but ideally want a little bit of hyperextension as well, as much as sort of 5 degrees of hyperextension. In other words, if your foot's on a physio bed and you're driving your knee down, you should be able to get your heel off the physio bed, not just get into full extension. So at least 0 degrees, ideally a little bit of hyperextension, and then we're looking for 125 degrees of knee flexion. And in the first sort of 2 weeks, we're looking to try and get at least 90. So those are sort of like your short-term range of motion goals to aim for. Now, if you don't pass those criteria, you can't just skip through into the next phase. You've got to make sure that you've really nailed that. So this should be daily activity, multiple times a day, really just trying to get after that extension. And don't get me wrong, it can be really uncomfortable. It can be quite painful at times, unfortunately. But with the right management and making sure you're doing things in a safe and effective way, you're going to be in a much better position to thrive in this phase. So those are short-term goals, at least. Now, once you've passed that for phase two, we've got return to strength. And what we're looking to try and do here is to build a foundation of strength prior to going back to running. Without those key criteria, again, you put yourself at risk of further injury because without having that return to strength sort of phase ticked off, there's just no way you're going to be strong enough to get back to running. I mean, we know that, for example, in just sort of typical running, you're looking at 3 times body weight of force going through your lower body. And in sprinting, it can be as high as 7 times body weight of force going through the soleus. So clearly huge amounts of load going through the lower limb. If you're not strong enough to tolerate that, then you're going to put yourself at much higher risk. So making sure that in phase two, we've achieved these strength markers. Now, there's two aspects to this. One is max strength. So things like back squat and single leg press scores. We're looking for over 1.5 times body weight. So if you weigh 60 kilos, we're looking for a 90 kilo 1RM. Or if you're 100 kilos, we're looking for 150 kilos. Then secondly, it's capacity. So it's how many reps you can do of body weight exercises. So single leg squat, bridge, calf scores, and also trunk capacity scores are really key here. Now we're looking for in phase two, typically around 10 reps on a single leg squat. We're looking for around 20 reps on a calf raise and 20 reps on a single leg bridge, and then something like at least 30 to 60-second side plank on each side, just so you've got the requisite lateral trunk capacity as well. Interestingly, with lateral trunk, one of the key factors associated with risk of re-injury and injury more generally is lateral trunk lean. So typically you might get yourself into a position where you cut to change direction in a non-contact situation and your trunk leans one way whilst your knee moves in the opposite way. And that creates more torque around the knee, which can put obviously a lot more load through the ACL itself. So what we're looking for then is single leg squat, bridge, calf, trunk, and max strength scores here, as well as just some basic balance and proprioceptive based scores as well, just so you've ticked off all the boxes and you know that you are good to go essentially. Now, another key factor here is asymmetry. So we're looking for at least or no more than 15% asymmetry, ideally 10%. So if, for example, you could do the 10 reps of a single leg squat on your non-affected side, but you could only do 7 on your non-affected side, or you could do 10 on your affected side, but you could do 20 on your non-affected side, you've also got to make sure that the asymmetry isn't significant as well. So 10 to 15% asymmetry at an absolute max at this stage is what we're looking for. Any more than that, even if the scores themselves are good, keep going until you've achieved asymmetry below 10 to 15% as well, or within that range of 10 to 15%. So once you've achieved that, asymmetry scores are 10 to 15%. On the single leg squat, 10 reps, calf and bridge scores, 20 reps, trunk, lateral, side plank scores of 30 to 60 seconds, and max strength scores of 1.5 body weight on a back squat or a single leg press. You can then move on to running. So you know that you're strong, you're resilient, you've got full range of motion. You can move on to phase 3, and that is returning to running now. Now, secondly to that, you can also include sport-specific components here, not necessarily full returning to sport, but you can start to add in low-level skills associated with the sport. So if you're a rugby player, just basic passing drills. If you're a hockey player, basic passing, dribbling skills. Football, the same. Just very, very low-level skills, just you're incorporating some sport-specific elements now. What we're also looking to include here is jump scores. So not just capacity and strength, but also the ability to land on one leg and also achieve good asymmetry between the left and the right side. So with capacity, the numbers jump up here. So whereas before in a single leg squat, we're looking for around 10 reps. Now we're looking for 20 to 25 reps. On the calf scores, we're looking for sort of 25 to 30 reps, similarly with the bridge. And then with the squat and back squat and single leg press scores, we're looking for around 1.8 times body weight. So you can see how each phase builds on the last, making sure we're more and more resilient to be able to get back into full return to sport. Now, with return to running, there's obviously a phased approach to this as well. You'd want to start off with simple linear running and then build that into lateral running before kind of higher speed, repeat sprint ability work, which would come into phase 4, return to sport. So you might start off with something just as simple as 30 seconds of linear jogging with 30 seconds of recovery, building volume, and then once you've built some good volume, start to add some intensity to that as well. And then you can start to build in some lateral change of direction movements at a very, very slow speed initially, just to build confidence, and then again start to increase the intensity over time. So that can be really, really phased, and that deserves its own video, of which I have done videos before. So just want to make sure it's a graduated return to running as well. So once you've achieved all of those, we're then into the fun part. We're into phase 4. Now, this is typically between 6 to 9 months, where we're looking to return to sport now. And in this phase, we're looking to basically prepare for a full psychological assessment and a full physical assessment as well to get you back to sport. The end goal being that if you pass all of those scores, you are ready to return to sport fully and you can complete a full week of training before then being given the green light to go back to matches, which is really, really good news. Now, there's a few different protocols you can use here. One of them is the Melbourne ACL assessment. And what that does is gives you a composite score around psychological readiness, physical readiness, and obviously things like functional testing as well. So if you pass all of those tests, and that covers off strength, it covers capacity, range of motion, localized swelling and effusion in the knee itself, your confidence in the knee, how the knee is responding to loading. So if it's swelling up consistently, that type of thing, that would obviously be a red flag for returning to sport. But if you passed all of those things, then you're given the green light to go back to sport. So what you're typically looking for in the ACL assessment with the Melbourne protocol is 95 out of 100 in this composite score system. So if you pass all of that, you're good to go and you can return to sport, which is amazing news, obviously. But it doesn't stop there. And just because you're back now at this kind of typically 9 month mark, there has to be a continuation of programming. There has to be a continuation of rehab and making sure you're doing everything you can to reduce the risk of re-injury. Because even those who pass a sort of graduated criteria-based assessment process and do everything right, there's still going to be some degree of risk there simply because you've been injured before. So just making sure that you're continuing with this type of work is going to be massively important for your long-term success and the risk of re-injury. Now, if we do all the right things, we know that the risk can be as low as 2% of re-injury. So just making sure we're doing all the right things is key here. So once you're back playing sport fully. Phase 5 is just a continuation of that work. Now, the guidelines say 3 months plus. In reality, this should be indefinite, that you're just continuing to do high quality training to prepare yourself as best as possible and therefore not get injured, just as you should have been doing in the first place anyway. But as a general rule of thumb, 3 months at least 3 times a week of this type of work is going to be massively important so you don't increase the risk of re-injury, because what can happen is you build and build and build and build and get yourself into this amazing physical condition, go back to sport and then stop that rehab work. Obviously the physical state will begin to decline and the risk begins to creep up. So just continuing with that as a habit every single week, hugely important. But as I say, this needs to be a really a long-term commitment to making sure you're training really, really well, preparing well, so that you're reducing the risk of long-term injury as much as possible. You do hear, obviously, of stories of people re-injuring themselves again, even if they're doing the right things. And that can just be unfortunate and really bad luck. So do everything you can to take control of that and make sure you're doing what you can to reduce your risk of injury, get yourself fully prepared. So I hope that's been a useful overview of the 5 key phases. If you click the link below, there's a masterclass which covers off more of this in depth, some of the key factors associated with risk of re-injury and what you can do about it as well.